Okay, welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at some of the use cases around modifying passwords. So right now, if I log in, our first user here is an administrative user. So you can go in and modify, for example, Wilma here. If I just wanted to update their first name and hit save, I get this error that says passwords must be greater than 5 characters in length. Now, I didn't log in as Wilma. Maybe I just wanted to update her name. I should not be resetting her password as a result. So one of our existing use cases is broken. We need to be able to handle this scenario where we can make a change here without having to type in a new password. So that's going to require us to actually modify several different areas throughout our code base. So one of the ways you can look at this is you can start thinking, okay, in order to modify that, let's take a look at the controller for that particular screen. So that is our new user view controller. Zoom in here. So if I scroll down, there is a method in here called update. Oh, there it is. Sorry. The Save Volunteer button is pushed. So what happens here is it first checks if the passwords match, right? We had this method called valid password that would validate that they matched and that they were over a certain size. And then we would look to see, well, is the screen a preloaded volunteer, in which case it's an update. We're going to call our update volunteer methods. Or is it a new user, in which case, if they had a custom image file, we would use this constructor. And if they didn't have a custom image, we would use a default image. So really what we're looking at is this use case here. Now, the challenge here is we don't necessarily want to validate the password if it's an existing user. And remember, we have a method called a preload data. Okay? So if it's a new user, this method wouldn't be called. But if it's an existing user, in order to set all the fields, we would use this method. And the first thing it does is it populates this variable, this global variable for a volunteer. So what we can do is we can actually look at this. We say, well, if it's a valid password, but the other sort of valid use case, so I can say, or volunteer not null, okay? So if the passwords are valid, or we have an existing volunteer, in that case, we can now step in, right? So either of these are acceptable criteria now, right? So if it's a new user, the volunteer would be null, in which case it'll force it to validate the passwords. So now we have this updating of the volunteer to deal with. So it says, you know, if the volunteer is not null, so we're doing an update. We call this method update volunteer. Let's take a look at what that does for us. Down to there we go. So what the update volunteer method does is it reads, so it takes our volunteer that's preloaded, and it's going to read whatever in the first name text field, the last name, phone number, birthday, and the image file. And it will automatically copy the image file, which we actually don't want. We're going to end up with a lot of duplicated things if we do that. So I'm going to add, rather than always copying, I'm going to add a little bit of safety in here. I'm going to say if and a variable setup, if image file changed, we called it. So if image file is changed, let's copy it. Let's move it. Because remember, when we do the copy, it gives it a unique name, and but I don't want to do that unless it's changed. So this is the first thing we need to do, is a little protective piece here. But now the other is, we actually, this method, this update volunteer method, it doesn't do anything with the passwords. So we need to handle that as well. So let's go back to our save. Okay, so here's our update. So update the volunteer, and then we call from the model class. Okay, so we say update the volunteer in the database. So let's take a look here. If we go to our volunteer class, zoom in a bit. It's inserting a new user. And then we have this method called update volunteer in database. And here, if we take a look, it says update the volunteers database or table, set the first name, last name, phone number, right? So our update volunteer method populated all these things, but it doesn't do anything for the actual password, right? We're only updating user information. And if we go down, here we have, again, an update, but doesn't take into account the password. So, so we need to handle this scenario. And I think what we're going to do, the easiest way to do this is, because the password's a very unique item, and if we look in our constructor, when we create a password, we do a couple different things. One is we generate a unique salt, and then we we have our password generator generate a password. So it's not quite as easy as just reading it from the database. So let's just create our own method for doing this. So let's this method will create a new salt and an encrypted password and store it in the database. So let's go public void change password. So this will be the new password that we pass into our method. And then everything else we're going to do is sort of a combination of the constructor and the update. So let's go up to our constructor. And let's grab these two lines here. Okay. And add in a throws clause. So we'll generate a new salt. And we'll update the password. Okay, so we're going to create a new encrypted password. Ooh. New password and a new salt. Then we need to store that in the database. So to do that, let's go to our update volunteer in the database. We're going to have our prepared statement here. Copy this. We're going to modify it. So it's not a direct copy and paste, but it's similar. Okay. So here, where it's going to be different is we need to actually add the salt. So let's also, where's our insert method here? So we do have a little bit of work to do with our there we go. There's how we're going to insert the salt. Steal that as well. Okay, so let's work on our update then. So we're going to update volunteers, set password equal to something, and salt. And we won't worry about these other fields. We're going to update the password and the salt where volunteer ID equals something. And if we go to our database, we run it, password and salt. Yes, we've got the right field names. Okay, so then we just need to update this. So, we have our string. This is what our SQL statement's going to look like. We do not need to convert the dates. Whoops, my apologies. But we'll bind the parameters now. So the first thing we're going to do is the password field. And the second thing is going to be our converting our byte array into a blob so it can be stored in the database. And then the third thing is going to be the volunteer ID. And we execute the update and close it. So now we have an ability to store the new password. We have a method that will do just the password change itself. So let's go back to our controller. So here, we can say this is, update the user information. And here we can say update password if it changed. If, and now we can use some of the aspects of our view to find out if it changed. So if the password field because it returns a string, so we can say, is it empty? Okay. So if it's not empty, if our password field is not empty, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to check if it's a valid password. So if what do we call it? We called it if it's a valid password. That method will validate that they match and that they're over a certain length. And we can say, okay, so we've got a valid password. So volunteer password we'll pass in is whatever's in the password field. So we say password field, get the text. Update it in the database. And no problem. It'll then display, whatever went wrong through this valid password method, because that updates our error field. So let's give this a little test drive. Okay, so I'm going to log in is Wilma, actually, this time, number 2. So we're able to do that update without updating the password. Now I'm going to change the password. And let's just take a look in our database. So right now, the password starts with 2D545. Okay. Hit save. And if we go back and look in our database, so it was 2D545. And now it's E84D. So it has changed. And let's see. Log in, and we're able to log in. So we have been able to successfully change her password. So our methods work, which is fantastic. These are both administrators. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at when a few other use cases around handling the different roles of administrative versus non-administrative users. But I think this is a good place to end this one, and we'll see you in the next video.